just a just a kind of brief thing to get us going. I want you to think about one student that you've got at the moment, maybe your hardest to reach student, and ask the question, what is their behavior telling you at the moment? So maybe take 30 seconds to reflect on that. And I'm going to show you a 2-minute video clip, and then I'm just going to rifle through a load of slides. So one, probably your hardest to reach student, if you think about them for 30 seconds, what is their behavior telling you at the moment? Okay, let me see if I can play this video.
I'm rude because I like the feeling of power and control it gives me, especially as I often feel very out of control on the inside. I am rude because it gives me an outlet for all my pent-up emotions that I struggle to identify.
I'm rude because people in my past spoke to me or each other that way, and I'm used to it.
I am rude because it gives me attention, even if it's negative attention.
I am rude because I know it winds you up, and I like to feel in control of you, so I don't feel as scared.
I am rude because I'm tired, hungry, thirsty, or just want to cuddle, but don't realise I'm feeling these things.
I am rude because I've got heightened levels of cortisol in my body, which pushes me into fight, flight, or freeze.
I am rude because you've done something nice with me or for me, and I want to remind you that I'm a bad kid.
That's because on the inside, I'm filled with shame, and I have a negative internal working model. I don't believe I deserve good or nice things, so I sabotage everything.
I am rude because I want to elicit the same response from you that I received from either my previous or birth family. It feels comfortable when you behave in a way that I expect, even though it's not good for me, and just proves that I'm right and that all adults are the same.
I am rude because you got too close, and I'm scared of attachment. I'm rude to push you away and reject you before you reject me.
I am rude because I'm perceiving a threat when there is none. This is called faulty neuroception.
I am rude because I can't think before I behave in a certain way or say the wrong thing. I have no internal inhibitors.
I'm rude because my higher brain is underdeveloped and offline. I'm rude because that's the label I've been given by everyone else, so I might as well live up to it.
Finally, I'm mostly rude because I'm scared.
Okay. So clearly, I'm already preaching to the choir because you're here, and you get the fact that all behavior is just communication. So it's difficult for us to understand sometimes. It's difficult for us to unpack and get to the bottom of. But the key underlying principles, if you're going to set up a decent AP or a decent in-house provision, are the therapeutic practice approach of pace, so playful acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. So really kind of working with the students to understand that you want to get underneath the bonnet and really find out what are these things communicating. There's a brilliant resource that's published by Oxford University that's on the link on the slides that I'll send you, that gives you a bit of insight into PACE for teachers. So how do we really help to model what good emotional regulation looks like and allow the students to learn that kind of co-regulation from us? And there's a whole host of approaches that even when they're being as distant and as adamant that they want to push you away as possible, there's a whole host of stuff on what you can do to bring about disconfirming experiences. Now, I've got some stuff that I'll reference later on that. It's very unusual for me to be able to talk about the underlying principles with an Ofsted hat on. But the reason I do that is that the latest framework, believe it or not, is actually way better for the hardest to reach students. and it looks at how are we making sure that their needs are met first and foremost. So it's not necessarily about the impact on the wider classes. It's not necessarily about the impact on your budget. The questions that always come back from an inspector will be, what have you done to meet the needs of this student? And it's not with regard to your whole school budget, not with regard to the rest of the class. It's what's this student received as a result of what you've identified, assessed and met. So there's a lot of stuff in the framework. It used to be really easy. Let me just say, when assessing other settings, and an in-house setting could come under this category, paragraph 373 used to say, how have you adapted the curriculum and what have you done to identify, assess and meet the needs of those students? It's now covered over 8 different paragraphs. And unless you've got an idiot like me that knows the framework well, what I'll probably do for you is reference in a follow-up message. These are the paragraphs that you can kind of draw upon for evidencing why you've taken certain approaches with certain students. The thing that I would say that you need to keep thinking about all the time is, remember that stuff about students need to know, remember and do more. So as a result of their time with you, they must be able to know, remember and do more. And if you've chosen to opt away from certain things, why have you emphasized other things more importantly? And I always say this when I'm coaching people through an Ofsted inspection, don't say phrases like we can't possibly, or we can't do that because we've not got. Always emphasize what you've prioritized instead. So when they say, why is this student not got, why is this student not doing a language while they're in their provision unit? You say, well, we focus more on plugging their gaps in English and maths. We focus more on their reset, their social, emotional skills, because that's the thing that they need the most to get back into the classroom. So rather than saying, oh, we can't possibly do, what you emphasize is, no, we prioritize this most because this is what they need in the here and now. We'll talk more about that at another point. Okay. I know this is really obvious and most schools do this, but the quality first teaching is your first barrier to prevent these students needing to get into your on-site provision. And there's a number of things that I can talk at length with you about. Some of the stuff will feel like it's countering your whole school behavior culture. Some of the stuff might really, really nicely line up with that. And what I mean by that is, one of the best things you can do to take those combative, confrontational conversations away from the students is at our, whatever it might be, at inclusion or at nurture or whatever you end up calling your on-site provision, at nurture we, and then you've got a whole host of statements. So at nurture we speak to each other respect, at nurture we consider the views of others, at nurture we, and you've got a whole host of things that embed your agreed learning culture that take it away from why are you swearing at that young person, why are you, which immediately comes into the confrontation. And the reminder can be there, remember that at nurture we do X, Y, and Z, that you've got those consistent reminders without needing to have that confrontational approach. 3 is the magic number. I'm sure many of you will know this, but again, the kids get very quickly used to this idea that, oh, I've been told twice now, the third time's the last time I'm going to be told, and then there's going to be a consequence as a result of that. So I often say the thing that gives students safety and regularity is if every member of staff uses 3 as the magic number, they clock, oh crikey, I've been told twice now, if I don't do this, there's going to be a consequence. Tied in with that is this notion of take-up time. And there's a brilliant section in the PACE resource that I've embedded in the previous slide that looks at how do you give the student a chance to get it right? How do you give the student a chance to really clearly deliver your expectation? This is what I've asked you to do. And then you say to them, I can see you struggling with that. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to take a breath, plan to do it. I'm only 2 seconds away. I'm going to go and talk to Tommy and I'm going to be back to talk to you. And it just gives them that chance that they don't need to cede power and control completely, because the attention of the other students has been taken away from them as you've moved to a different part of the room. So there's some really, really important stuff about space, take up time. And then the final bit, so prior to the third instruction, is the if then statement. So if you continue to refuse to do work, then it's going to have to be done in break time. If you continue to talk to him with disrespect, then we're going to have to have a conversation with your parents, with such and such, about the way you're talking to people. So the if then statements, making it really clear, if you behave in this way, then these things will happen. And it sounds so abecedarian that you go, well, this is obvious stuff, but actually it doesn't happen in every classroom. And if we do get it happening in every classroom, they're the things that will stop that kind of flood of people needing your on-site provision. The final thing, that most people don't get right is keep the main thing the main thing. Now, what do I mean by that? If a student is really struggling with the ability to access a particular text because they've got a low reading age or they're really lacking in reading confidence, one of the things that that young person will do is they'll deflect their incompetence and their embarrassment by acting out in a particular way. And they'll say, I'm not doing this, this works SHIT, or, oh, you're the crappiest teacher, and actually what they're communicating is, I'm out of control, I'm embarrassed, and I'm going to do anything I can to deflect from the fact that I feel out of my comfort zone. Now, what often happens in a typical classroom is, oh my word, the student's sworn, and therefore they get on the phone with the behaviour person or the walkie-talkie or whatever. There's a Sims message that's sent, and even though it's not a productive coping mechanism, it's actually a destructive coping mechanism. It's a very effective one because the student has got what they wanted, which is, I'm in this place of out of my comfort zone. I've lost the control. And I've now been removed. And even though that's not a good thing, it's the effective thing. It's what I wanted to happen. I wanted to be removed from the situation. So what do I mean by keep the main thing the main thing? If a student says, this is SH1T, you're the worst teacher ever, we hate this work, you've got to be able to do two things. Number one, under the new framework, if you don't challenge every single time obscene language is used, they will call you up on that, but there's a way in which you can do that. So you can say to a student, remember, we talk to each other, respect in this classroom, no swearing, please, and not allow them to escalate that into, right, you've sworn, you're out, you know what the rules are with swearing. And you keep the main thing, which is with encouragement, with enticement, with patience, you get that young person to the place with scaffolding, with whatever you do, that they can read the text, that they can do the thing that you've asked them to do. And then the next point is delayed follow-up. So when that young person has overcome the thing that they're struggling with, when that person's calm, you've done that regulate, relate, repair, we'll talk about that in a minute, you then afterwards, maybe at lunchtime, maybe an hour later, you say, right, we had 3 incidents there of poor language. One of your targets is that the way in which you communicate with people has got to be better. You've got to speak to people with respect, and you deal with it once they're in that place that they can actually engage in the conversation around consequence and sanction. And it's not, and I'm really keen to emphasize this, it's not saying to a young person, you swore, we don't swear in this school, there's loads of rules, but you get away with it because you're in provision. No, it's, we're going to deal with this, but we're going to keep the main thing the main thing. The reason I'm emphasizing this and really laboring the point is, for your typical old school practitioners, they come in and they say that young person has just sworn and nothing's happened to him. And before you know it, you get into this kind of this tit for tat. They've done that, consequence ladder, bosh, bosh, bosh. And that's one of the biggest mindset challenges you have with a fairly entrenched mainstream type teacher. And that sounds awful, and I don't mean it to, but that's one of the biggest challenges. What does it mean to do things therapeutically? Therapeutic doesn't mean you remove consequence. It just means that it's delivered in a different way. I'm getting lots of smiles, so I'm guessing this is not alien to you guys, bless you. The final thing, before I talk about disconfirming experiences, is getting staff to pick up their own tab. And this is a preventative thing rather than, yes, this helps within your unit, within your in-house. If Mr. Smith, who's always sending 3 or 4 kids out, has, you know, head of year 10, or he's got, you know, pastoral support or whatever, that always deal with the consequences, the transfer of relational currency is always away from him, and his authority is also continually diminished. So if you've got Mr. Smith and you say, right, Mr. Smith, we absolutely understand that it's really important that we can support you in those circumstances, but actually you need to have a phone call with Mrs. Jones's, with Miss Jones, Tommy's mum, because it's you that needs the credibility, and you're the one that little Tommy needs to understand and respect when you're in the classroom. It's no good me as the pastoral lead doing that. You've got to be the one that has that credibility and currency. So when I talk about pick up your own tab, what I mean is the person that had the point of conflict, irrespective of whose fault it was, they're the person to repair that relationship. That can be supported by academic, pastoral kind of heads of, but the person that the conflict is with, it's really important that continues. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about disconfirming experiences in another slide, but the key principle there is you relate to the young person, you let them know that you've seen them, you help them regulate by describing what you're seeing. I can see that you're having a tough time. This is really difficult. I can see that you're not in the best place to deal with this. I'm going to give you 30 seconds, and you basically narrate, and this is for, especially for our primary colleagues, this can often be the bread and butter for those guys, but you model what it looks like. I feel like that too as well sometimes. When I've got 5 or 6 things going through my head, I really struggle with that. But one of the things that I can do is, so you relate, you regulate, and then, as I said before, when you've given them a time, an opportunity to calm, you then do the repair later on. And part of that repair might be there's a consequence for, but that's a key part of it, the repair. Because what the students need to feel, and as per that very emotive video, they need to feel that we're for them, no matter how awful their behavior's been. They need to feel that we are always going to have a currency of grace if it's the 3rd time that day that there's been a slanging match or a shouting or a whatever. So they always need to feel that, yes, there's consequence, but we see them and they don't diminish in value just because they're grappling with all these things. Okay, key things to avoid in your in-house provision. This is not rocket science, but it does need stating, because I've seen this right across the country for the last 5 years. People setting up in-house provision going, oh, we're spending a fortune on this stuff. And I know that's not the only reason, but we're spending a fortune on this stuff. This is what we're going to do. And it typically is staffed by a teaching assistant who's full-time in that provision. And then they'll usually say, well, actually, you know, it's a bit unreasonable for us to expect that TA to be delivering a bit of English, bit of maths, bit of emotional literacy. Well, what we'll do is we'll staff it and then we'll put people in on a rota. And you and I both know that the most important thing for our kids is connection and relationship. And as soon as you bring new people into that provision, whether that be new students, new staff, people passing through that environment, that is the key thing to get them on high alert again and to take them back to that dysregulated phase. So please avoid, if at all possible, if you've got the budget for it, please avoid going, we're going to stick a TA in and we're going to have somebody on a rota. My strongest recommendation for you, if you're going to have 10 or more students in the setting, is you need the best teacher you've got, and a really relational teaching assistant. Now, when I say the best teacher you've got, for my secondary colleagues, this is going to sound like a strange thing to do. If you've got time, which we don't normally have, go out to recruit a brilliant primary school teacher. So I oversaw a network of 13 schools, and they were all for secondary age students. And the best teachers were those that came from a primary school, because they'd got that rounded offer. They've got the multiple tools in the belt. They were not specialists in every subject, but they were very good at teaching most subjects. They were used to being with the students all day and what that looks like, the rhythms of the day. There's a whole host of things that primary teachers do really, really well that we can learn from in secondary. So if you've got the facility to do that, a decent primary teacher would be an absolute blessing. Avoid the dumping ground effect. And what I mean by that is, you might decide we're going to do it on a 2-week rolling program. So we're going to have 2 weeks, we're going to have 8 students in for 2 weeks at a time. And we're going to do some really intensive work with those students. And we're going to get underneath the bonnet. We're going to do X, Y, and Z. And then what happens, lo and behold, you've got your year 9 pastoral lead that's like, I'm really sorry, but I've got a meeting with a parent. I've got 2 kids following me around. I'm just going to stick these kids in here. Is that all right? And the answer needs to be, no, it's not all right. Because as soon as you change the focus of, we're doing some highly intensive intervention work, to this is just the holding pen, you completely undermine the quality of the provision that you're setting up. So there needs to be an agreed and widely bought into rationale that this is not the dumping ground. This is where we do our intervention work. This is the preventative. We're stopping these kids from being permanently excluded. And there's another place for these young people. So the young people that have just been in a fight, or they need a little bit of R&R, or they've had a nosebleed, or this is not the place for them. You need to keep this as consistent for that 2-week or however long block as you possibly can. Don't just do an identical timetable and expect that the students, because it's smaller, because it's quieter, will get more out of it and turn themselves around. And the reason I say that is, first of all, let's say you've got 8 kids in there. It's almost impossible for even if it's a brilliant teacher and a TA, it's almost impossible to deliver and meet the needs of 8 students that have got different timetables, different year groups, different etc. etc. I'm going to talk about an opportunity for in-house provision in a bit, where you can actually do some bespoke English and maths work, and student-led teacher set. So their main English teacher, their main maths teacher, for example, might be able to set them 2 weeks worth of work to say, this is what we're going to be covering over the next 2 weeks. And it would be brilliant if they didn't miss this stuff, because when they go back in, this is the stuff that they're going to need to be able to do. You want to avoid, though, just saying, well, this is their timetable, this is their timetable. We've got this ludicrous system where every single one of their subject teachers has got to send the work to provision, and you've got this absolute nightmare of a shuffling program where it's like, oh, you've got this, and you've got this, and you've got this. Because one of the things the inspectors will ask you is, how have you adapted the curriculum to meet the needs of that student? And if what they're saying is, well, we've put them in a different setting, we've made it smaller, we've done X, Y, and Z, we've taken them out of the loop, they'll say, well, the highest quality teaching they'd get to cover the breadth of subjects will be back in their classroom. So actually, you've disadvantaged the young people by bringing them in with a non-subject specialist and different age groups. You've got all these distractions. And remember what I said before, the key question from inspectors will be, what's in the best interest of the students? If you trip into that, oh, well, it's better for the 29, they don't give a monkeys about the 29 when they're asking you about this student, what's best for this student. So my strongest encouragement to you is really high intensive work on English and maths, and then thinking about what I call reset, or the emotional literacy stuff. I'm going to talk to you about Bloom's in a minute. The other thing to avoid is reduced timetables as a standard feature. So don't say, oh, at our provision, the kids come in at 10 and they leave at 2 every day, because we avoid the pinch points, we do X, Y, and Z, and that's why it's permanent. Under the framework, there's particular focus given to the reduction of timetable as a general rule of thumb. Now, what they say is they give senior leaders the opportunity to use that as an intervention. So if you've got issues with attendance or there's certain pinch points in the day, you can use that as an intervention, but don't have a carte blanche. Everyone who comes to provision is on a 4-hour day instead of a whatever your standard school day is, because they won't accept that. And actually, let's be clear, it's not in the best interest of the students getting back into a normal rhythm. Okay. Next slide. What works? So what works in setup? And then I'm going to look at what works in practice. So a really carefully considered curriculum offer. Make sure that if you're doing something very different to the classroom teachers in your English and maths, that there's a real wisdom in how that's been planned. So is it coherent? Is it cumulative? Is there time for space revisitation? Does it build on prior phases of learning? All that stuff, they will be asked in provision. Why have you designed your curriculum in this way? I've put there reset type lessons. That's what I worked on with a team of colleagues, which was effectively, Bloom's had 2 major taxonomies. So there's the Bloom's taxonomy of the cognitive domain, which everyone in education knows about, but there's the Bloom's taxonomy of the affective domain, which essentially changes the way our young people think and alters their value system. So how do we get them to prioritize the needs of other people? How do we get them to increase their levels of empathy and ability to debate and respect others and all that kind of stuff? Anything you can do and put in place around that, and I've got some stuff that I can send to you at a later date, but really go big on that stuff. That's the reason those kids are there. Their ability to regulate, their coping mechanisms, building resilience, all that type of stuff, they're the things that you want to go big on. Make sure you consult the parents in the planning process. So if you've got a young person that's coming into provision on Monday, get them in the week before and engage them in, this is what we're going to do. This is the intensive work. This is the clear purpose of why we're doing it. We don't want them to be excluded. There's a number of incidents that have happened. This is the work that we're going to do with them. And let them see their child sign the behaviour contract. At provision, this is what we expect in our setting. These are the things that we're going to do. And it almost starts as a clean slate. And there's something about that social contract of the parents seeing their child sign this contract that means when you've got those conversations on the phone, they've got that skin in the game, because it's like, yeah, well, we agreed to that. They signed it in our presence. And I'm not going to labour that because we've not got loads of time, but that's a really important phase. Start with the end in mind. And even if your desired time frame is only 2 weeks at a time, you're only going to have kids in for 2 weeks, start with the end in mind. What does it look like for them to go back in with success? What will success look like for each student? And be really clear with them. This is a 2-week block that we're working on. Maybe it'll go to 3 weeks if we're struggling, but this is a 2-week block. And the reason I say that is they will love it in there. The vast majority of the kids will feel safe, they'll feel heard, they'll build relationship. And as soon as they get told, if it's a complete surprise to them, oh, by the way, you're going back into mainstream on Monday, you've had a great 2 weeks, it's Friday, and shake of the hand, have a good Monday, and then lo and behold, Monday ain't great because they've had the best 2 weeks of their life. They felt heard and connected and making leaps and bounds worth of progress, and then they're back in. So and we used to see that in the AP world, where you'd have kids that would be with you for 6 months. They'd make phenomenal progress, no exclusions, reward points off the charts, like really knocking out of the park. And then when they come to the end of their placement, even when they actually knew they were going back in advance, you'd start to see little bits of the struggle and the panic again, because it's that outside of their zone of proximal development. It's like, oh, I want to be here, I want to stay here. So I can't emphasize that enough. Start with the end in mind. Be really clear that this is time limited. And then the final thing on that is frequent contact home. And I don't mean once a week, that's fine. My staff used to previously call home every day if they could for the students. And even if it was Tommy's had a great day, no kickoffs like yesterday, give him a pat on the back from me. I can't tell you how much value that adds when the young people know there's going to be a phone call home irrespective. And actually, if I have a good day today, there's going to be a phone call home and I get a pat on the back because my dad will tell me, hey, I had a phone call and it wasn't a bad one, it was a good one. I won't go into what that means in terms of the parents' relationship and their affordance of trust with the school, because actually what we know is cycles of deprivation, exclusion, social exclusion. Not always, but often, I would be talking to parents who'd been excluded themselves and their parents were excluded, and breaking that cycle is really important. So contact home, and don't be surprised if your staff say to you, you won't believe the number of people that said this is the first positive phone call they've ever had. You won't believe that, like they were completely horrified and shocked on the phone. It's frequent and it makes a drastic difference for the child's journey once they're back in. What works in practice, so when it's happening, like the day-to-day, when the kids land, do a check-in and a check-out. And what I mean by a check-in and a check-out is 10 minutes of, and we used to have a thing called My Day, 10 minutes of really simply allowing them to set targets. So it might be that they have consistent targets for a week. It might be that their targets are changed daily, but allow them to set targets for attainment as well as regulation. So it might be, and again, engaging the students with that, and the key person that they're working with on that day is so important, because it allows them every day to go, it's a clean slate. I had a bad day yesterday, but I can put that right again today. So every day being a clean start. It also allows you to do that little pastoral stuff of, what do you mean you had no sleep last night? What do you mean you slept on the floor? What do you mean? And don't be surprised if by doing things in-house, you learn more about these kids than you've ever known in the previous 2, 3, 4, 5 years with them. Because often you find out the stuff. A friend of mine works for a charity called Zarak, who provide free beds for children in primary schools. And they've given out thousands of beds throughout Leeds because there's so many parents struggling that they've got 4 or 5 kids sleeping in one sofa bed. And it's like, don't be surprised when you get to know these kids and they start to open up a little bit, that there'll be a number of other barriers that you've got absolutely no idea about. So that check-in and stuff is really important. Food being included with that is a major bonus if you can do it. Even if it's tea and toast, makes a huge difference. Disconfirming experiences. We talked about this a little bit before. Anything that you can do that undermines that child's belief that they're a nothing, staff don't like them, the system's against them anyway, all of those things, those false beliefs that often underpin their dysregulation and their mistrust of adults. So if it's about, they've sworn previously in a number of lessons and they're kicking off and they've got a terrible behavior record, they come to you, their underlying belief is, I'm a bad kid, the school's against me anyway, there's no point trying, all that's going to happen is it'll go wrong at some point, and as soon as it goes wrong, I'm out anyway and I'll be excluded and X, Y, and Z, and before you know it, that's where I'm going. A disconfirming experience undermines that belief for the child, and it's very, very unnerving for them to start off with. Because you think about the example before, little Tommy is refusing to read, he's terrified about accessing the text, so he swears, and his normal response is, I'm out of the classroom, my mum's on the phone, I'm being sent home, maybe grandparent picks me up or whatever, For him to not be sent home is like, what's going on? I've just sworn at you, what's going on? And you might get him swear again a bit louder, maybe a bit more aggressive this time with a bit of an F or a C bomb or whatever it might be. You might find that they get more dysregulated before the penny drops that, hang on a minute, this ain't going to work now. And I'm still going to be asked to read the text. And maybe I'll get given a reading frame or a writing frame or a bit of a scaffolding, or Miss is going to work with me. But crikey, they don't buy that. And it's very, very unnerving for them. But quickly, it changes their mindset to, okay, no matter what I do, the learning's the most important thing here, which is always the most important thing in school, isn't it? Frequent discussion. So again, start and end of the day, about movement towards those targets, knowledge of results. So whether it's attainment targets or regulation targets, having conversations every day with young people and passing that information back to parents as well. And just finding the coping mechanisms that work for some young people. For some young people, it's your fidget spinners. For some young people, it's the breathing techniques. For some young people, it's the timeout. There's a whole host of things that you can employ, but it'll be different for every student, and recognizing with them that there's going to be some trial and error that you're going to have to work through with them, and you're going to help them model it. And then finally, evidence of progress is really important. I've got an example that I'm going to show you shortly, but data, and what you'll often get is an inspector say, oh no, we don't ask for data anymore. It's not about the data. It's not about the data. However, if you stick a piece of paper in front of an inspector, they have to consider it. The number of times I've presented a case study to an inspector and they've just lifted verbatim a key chunk of text or even a whole paragraph sometimes, and you'll read that whole paragraph in your Ofsted report. And it's really encouraging, also a little bit unnerving because you're thinking, oh crikey, we better be careful what we stick in front of one. But I've seen it a number of times. The one I'm going to show you, there were 2 whole paragraphs that were lifted out and stuck in the West London Ofsted report a year and a bit ago. So data is important. Pupil and parent voice, and don't assume that it's got to be like hugely evidence-backed and you've got to have all this data. And if you do a round robin to the teachers and say, just checking, how's Tommy getting on? He's been back in for 2 weeks now. Just drop me a 1-line sentence with good, bad, not, indifferent, and a reason for it. And you'll see in a minute on the case study that I've put to, I've anonymized it for you because obviously I couldn't share young people's names and staff names, but really, really encourage you to do it. Just a couple of things for you to consider before I share that Word document, and I'll send it to you so you don't make too many notes. I'm going to send all this to you. Just consider that tailored English and maths work. In an alternative provision outside of school setting, it's impossible to cater for 12 different referrers' needs, 12 different students who've come from 12 different schools. In-house, you can say, right, English and maths, we're going to expect that their English and maths teachers give them bespoke work based upon their starting point, end point, what we're aiming to cover over this 2 or 3 week period, because they will say, what are you doing to close those attainment gaps? And as we know, usually numeracy and literacy are the key things that open up and unlock the rest of the curriculum for the kids. Consider location. A couple of reasons why. You don't necessarily want it to be in the middle of school. So actually something that's distant and on the edges of school might be a good thing because of the pastoral reasons that a lot of our kids end up in that kind of intensive environment, wanting to be a little bit distant from. The thinking's recently changed on this. There was always it's not fair for students to be out of sight, out of sight, out of mind, they're forgotten, they're excluded. What a lot of our young people used to say was, it's nice being here. I'm away from all the distractions. I'm away from all the things that used to cause me to have these triggers, flare-ups, bullying, whatever. I'm not completely against an on-site but off-block setup. And I know that's your circumstances will entirely dictate this. I get that. But all I'm saying is don't assume that your physical limitations of your school building will entirely rule out doing this well. I've seen it done well in a block on its own. I've actually seen it done well, very small, but I've seen it done well in a porter cabin, believe it or not. They did some brilliant work on making sure that the environment was as welcoming, as warm as possible. Temperature is a massive factor when you're in a porter cabin, but just think about the location. Timings of the day, if you're going to start late, finish late. Don't do we start at 10 because we don't want them to be mingling with the peers, and we finish at 2 so they can get out, because all that will happen there is you'll end up compounding a problem because you've got a shorter school day, and the kids, if they leave early, they'll wait around for the mates anyway, and you'll just be causing yourself a whole host of problems. So to consider the timings of the day. We talked before about code of conduct. I would suggest, if your school is very much on the therapeutic end of we're all inclusive, we give students every chance to succeed, then you can probably adapt that or even keep it the same for consistency. If you're down the positive discipline route and it's you get 2 warnings and if not, you're out. And I would strongly urge you to reconsider and say, well, what do we need to do differently in-house provision? First and foremost, because it's the right thing for these kids. But secondly, you'll get hammered in Ofsted if you don't. So they'll say your approach, you've not adapted your approaches whatsoever. You're just doing exactly the same thing. So the kids come to you and all you've done is delay the exclusion by 2 weeks because every single time these kids are going out. So just really carefully consider that. For some young people, you can use as a carrot break and duty circulation. Oh, you can have break with the rest of your classmates because you're doing really well. When you do, you repay that trust with acting responsibly, etc. But just consider those things. One of the things that you will get asked about is, we know from our research that early reading is often a barrier. Reading ages are often a barrier to accessing the curriculum. It's not unusual for young people that need extra intervention to have that simultaneous problem of having a low reading age. Just look at what you do as a school. Is your approach, your whole school approach, sufficiently catering for early readers or reading refusers? And if not, have a think about what that could look like. There's some great stuff out there with Accelerated Reader. There's some really good, there's a thing called That Reading Thing, which is, again, a synthetic phonics program. Anyway, just consider that. And then finally, do you want to do a staggered reintegration? The challenge with that is it limits the amount of young people you can take at a kind of a clear cutoff. Or do you want to have a clear end that at the end of this, however many, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever, you go back into the rest of the classrooms? I've seen both work well, but the length of placement dictates that. I'm going to show you a case study in a minute. I'm a cheapskate, so my Zoom's going to kick us out in a minute. What I'll do, it will let you back on, by the way. If you click back on the video, click on the Zoom link, it'll put us back on. Case studies, 100% use them. Soft information is just as important as the hard information, and make sure you get testimonials